Hi, my name is Jennifer Luarca, and I am an academic coach at the Learning Center. This short video is going to talk about moving beyond memorization and really thinking through ways to apply your knowledge. Now, this is important to understand, and it's really grounded in the idea of Bloom's taxonomy, which is a taxonomy aimed at helping instructors, teachers, educators develop teaching methods and evaluate knowledge. But it's important for students to understand this as well, because oftentimes what we find is exams are structured within the taxonomy. So we will have different levels of questions, and most students, their practice focuses on the first and second level and really doesn't stem beyond that. And when we see challenges with exams of students not performing well on exams, it's because their lower level study strategies are not matching up with the higher level questions or expectations. So what I'm going to do is walk you through the taxonomy, talk about the different stages, and show you some examples of ways that you can study at each stage. So here we go. Our first stage is the remember stage. So very basic. This is something we've done since kindergarten, right? Is remember, being able to recognize and recall facts. This is where we tend to use memorization and repetition as our primary ways of study. And some verbs associated with this stage are listing, reciting, outlining, and so forth. You see them on the screen. So if you know that your exam is going to incorporate some remember level questions, then you can definitely use memorization and repetition and utilize some of these verbs to help practice for that exam, right? And this is a very popular level, and students are really comfortable with this level, and this tends to be where our study strategies are grounded, is in this remember stage, and then also in the next stage of understanding. So these first two stages are the foundations for most of our learning practice and our study practice, right? We've got to remember, and then we've got to understand, which means just being able to explain what something means, right? And we see those verbs here: describe, explain, paraphrase, restate, summarize. This is what we do when we're studying usually, right? Memorization, repetition, and putting things into our own words. And typically what I see is this is where students' study strategies stop, is this second level of learning. But then the challenge comes, especially when people make the jump from lower to upper division coursework, or our transfers coming in right at upper division coursework, is they're utilizing those first two strategies I discussed, or first two levels, and their questions on exams are often at the third level, which is application, right? Applying facts, rules, and concepts and ideas. Being able to not just explain what something is or give you the definition, but to really make it live in the real world, demonstrate the knowledge. So what's important here is those first two levels are critical to being able to get to this level of application. But if you get an application question on an exam and you have not practiced thinking about the concept through the lens of application, you are not going to do well on your exam. And what we see often is that students get examples of real world situations illustrating the concepts, and they have not thought about it that way, and they really struggle to answer those questions. So if you know you're going to be getting application style questions, what we want to do is, when we're practicing or creating study tools, we want to define the concept, of course, because we have to know what it's about, right? And be able to explain it in your own words. But then you want to be able to give a real world example, or have a bunch of examples and pick the one that matches best, right? So that now we're thinking not only about the first two levels, but we're really starting to apply the knowledge. We're working with our knowledge at this point. This is really important. And this is probably the most common method of assessment, again, for our upper division courses, and then a lot of our lower division too. We see this a lot in communications, the idea of application, where students will memorize definitions of communication concepts, but you're not asked definitions on the exam, you're given examples and you have to match. So prepare that way, okay? The next level is really when we're starting to think about those higher level courses, right? So senior year, We're thinking through analyzation, which is breaking down information into component parts, really being able to break it apart and look at all the pieces that make up a concept. And verbs that might work here are break down, categorize, classify, diagram, illustrate. We might see some of these types of questions too on some of those upper division courses, or maybe we'll have one of these questions on the final where we've worked towards this idea of analyzing our entire semester, and now's a chance to practice that, right? So some study techniques that will work here are concept mapping, charting, diagramming. Really great ways to see connections, to break information down and start to look at those parts. Then, after analyzing, we want to be able to evaluate, right? And so this is where a lot of our grad work comes in, or again, maybe some senior level courses. It's being able to judge information, evaluate it. After we've broken it down, we want to say, okay, well, does it support? Is it convincing? What's the research? Who's saying this? This step is often used when we're looking at journal articles and we're analyzing content. And instructors will look at your papers through the lens of evaluation. It's not enough in a paper to say something, but you have to support it with evidence, right? And so that is this evaluation stage is, am I saying it? Am I supporting it? Where does that support come from? Is it valued in the field or not, right? And so we're looking at that. If we're expected to evaluate things on exams, oftentimes that's a matter of comparing and contrasting. So we want to be able to do that as we're studying, okay? And finally, we want to create, right? So creating is the ultimate. Oftentimes this is the culmination of graduate work, creating a thesis where we've now taken all of this information, broken it down, and now we're combining it to make it something new. We may do creation also. I know in some of our programs on campus where we have senior projects or senior thesis, where we're working with creation. We're working with everything that we've learned and we're putting it together in a new way, okay? So some important verbs here are design, formulate, build, invent, develop, modify, right? We're taking everything that we have and we're taking it a step farther. We're changing it in some way, or we're creating something new, okay? And so what we want to do is, as we're studying for this, is really practice that idea, start to look at connections, and start to group information as it relates to one another so that if we're writing a paper or we're doing a project, we can clearly see these concepts support this aspect of this idea and these concepts will support this aspect, right? So when we're talking about creation, organization is a really important part of that because ultimately we've got to put it all together in a format that makes sense, okay? So again, I'm going to zone back in on this third level because I see this is where students struggle the most is application. So what you can do from the very beginning is start to think about not just understanding a concept, not just memorizing it, but how does it live in the real world? Ask those questions in class. Can you give me a real world example? Or look for that in the textbook as you read. Or even look it up online, right? Examples of concepts. And we want to incorporate that into our study tools as much as possible and into our notes. Now, the last thing I want to say is when you're doing an exam review, so after you take an exam, hopefully you get the opportunity to go through that exam again after the exam to look at what you did well and what you didn't do well, how you're going to change up your study strategy. And the thing that should drive your study strategy change should be the style of question you're getting. And that's where this structure, this idea of Bloom's taxonomy really comes into play, is you can start to look at these questions on the exam and say, okay, some were knowledge-based, but most of them were application. I did have one creation question. So we can start to say, okay, we are expected to do all of these different things on the exam. How can I change my study strategy to address those expectations? All right. If you want more help with this, if you want me to help go through an exam with you, I'm more than happy to do that. Again, my name is Jennifer Luarca. I'm an academic coach on campus at the Learning Center. And you can visit our website to learn more about scheduling appointments with me and utilizing some more resources related to learning. Thank you.